What's going on, everybody? This is the blockchain backer bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we're going to take a quick peek over here at the Bitcoin price chart and talk about the altcoin market. But in this video, besides just talking about the crypto market, I figured we'd take a look at more of what's going on in the macro world and try to tie some things together. As you know, there's a lot of geopolitical stuff going on. There's a lot of crazy stuff happening. Commodities, the dollar, U.S. oil, crude oil. So I figured we'd take a peek at these things. And while it's very difficult to piece all of these things together because they're all happening so quickly, let's not ignore them. Let's take a peek at them and see what they're doing. So first things first, in regards to Bitcoin, we can see we're still just hanging out in these price levels, paused out in here. We know that there was a pause out period that happened in this fractal last time. Question is the fractal ever going to break? I sure kind of hope it does, but it's still following it at this point. Time will tell if something wild happens later today. It looks like, based on how it's followed timing so impeccably well over the course of the last 6 months, you would think if it's going to continue following, a move is coming in the cards pretty soon. Now, over here in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, it is having a green day. The market is up today for the Dow Jones. And one of the things we've spent quite a bit of time talking about over the years has been the structure of the Dow Jones in relation to the Roaring 20s, or the massive bubble that was printed in the US stock market prior to the Great Depression happening, and how there are unbelievably similar structures that have happened here over the course of the last 2 decades for the Dow Jones in relation to what happened during that time period. And that along the way, we had a lot of similar stopping points in here. And from a percentage standpoint, equivalent moves, and that even where the Dow Jones is at right now, hey, there was a pausing period that happened right in there before one final push up happened, setting new all-time highs, and then boom, down and away it went. And that we can see that the Dow has held itself in here. And taking a peek at today's price action, we were able to pop up higher than where we popped up last week. So we did wick a little bit higher today than we did back on February 25th, the day after the whole chaotic day where, it fell 870 points and then reclaimed it all and then popped up even higher the next day. So today's price action was able to set a new high in relation to last week, but this is just kind of small time stuff, right? The question is, will the Dow Jones go on and set that new high, go on and have its final blow off top up in here, as we've seen happen in previous time periods, right? But when I think of that, when I think of like a blow off top happening in something, right, is that, what usually happens on blow off tops and endings? It's usually that everybody is going to get wrong footed, right? I mean, that's just a regular thing that happens. Everybody gets wrong footed. Everybody buys a top. They think it's going to keep going up forever, or else there wouldn't be such extreme volumes at tops. There wouldn't be so much euphoria at tops if people didn't think it was going to keep breaking up higher. And so just when I just kind of step back and try to think about it for a minute and say, is there anything happening in the world right now that could get people to be completely panicked into the idea that they just need to throw their money into markets, need to throw their money into assets because they don't really have any choice? And I think one of the craziest things that's happening in the markets right now is what's happening with crude oil. Now, we talked about this last week, and we have just set prices that we haven't set since 2008. And we haven't seen this type of parabolic rise happen over here in oil since back in 2007. Now, what's been interesting about the price level that we were just recently at last week is that we know when the bubble popped for oil back in 2008, it fell from $147 all the way down to $33. After finding that low, it had a series of higher lows grinding its way up until finally it set its first new lower low and then crashed. Last week, the price of oil had finally gotten back to this price level that it had not seen in 8 years. Massive geopolitical event occurred, causing price to break out. And not only that, it just set a new high in relation to 2011. So one of the arguments I've always had about Bitcoin and inflation and how everybody piled into Bitcoin at, $55,000, $60,000 saying, inflation, right? But the reality was that Bitcoin ran up for the anticipation of inflation. The Fed was saying that there would not be massive inflation. Then they were saying it's going to be transitory, right? It was all this stuff saying inflation wasn't going to happen. There were going to be no consequences of printing all this money. But people smart enough to know said, hey, yeah, there is. There's going to be a ton of inflation coming from that. And my argument has been is, what's the narrative that we have up here for Bitcoin for more inflation? Yeah, the inflation's here, but we anticipated this. That's what the whole run up from 6,000 to 60,000 was, the anticipation of inflation arriving. Do you see any indicators of additional inflation coming? And well, this is an interesting thing, right? Oil, we're seeing the highest oil prices we've seen in 14 years, which translates into gasoline prices, right? If the price of gasoline is going to be rising for not only just transportation and trucking and cargo ships and airplanes to move products around, but you need gas to make products. If we now have a new massive cost worked into it, don't you think that's going to cause more inflation? So are we at the point right now where anticipating more inflation coming down the pike? I think so. Now, of course, that depends on probably oil maintaining these prices. If oil pulls some trickery like this and then just turns over on itself and heads back down, is there long-term sustained inflation? No, I don't think so. But if it maintains the prices up there, or if it keeps going up much higher than where it's at, I would think the anticipation of inflation would be there. And so that's kind of one thing I can think of, right? Why would people FOMO buy the top of the Dow Jones Industrial Average? And well, the anticipation of inflation, the anticipation that everything is going to go skyrocketing due to costs. But in the end, could oil still pull one of these moves right in here at the top, where everyone just kind of FOMO buys the stock market and then oil rug pulls itself? I mean, it's always possible, right? I don't know, but I do know it's a crazy moment in time that oil is now doing this. And I saw this tweet over here by Jim Bianco at Bianco Research, where he says, not every recession is led by a 50% rise in crude oil, but every 50% rise in crude oil has led to a recession. And what we can see is when these 50% rises happen over here in oil, shortly thereafter, a recession has eventually happened. And so while we see oil moving up really high, we see that, hey, the anticipation of inflation is there. The Dow Jones fractal, the Dow Jones rise of what we've seen happen over the last 20 years is similar to previous bubbles in the Dow. What would cause people to FOMO buy the top? Potentially the anticipation of significant inflation due to oil. But what we know is that throughout history, anytime you have these 50% rises that end up happening in oil, eventually it led to a recession. And I know all of this is kind of like, how do we work it all together? But the reality is trying to figure out the narrative. What would it be like in a moment like that of extreme euphoria? Extreme euphoria transferring into equities, cryptocurrencies, commodities, which are absolutely anticipating inflation. Look at what wheat has done. In the last 2 weeks, wheat is up 32%. In the last 3 months, soybeans are up 30%. And corn in the last month and a half is up 17%. All of these in breakout right now. So we're seeing inflation already being priced into commodities right now. In addition, right, what are the other problems that come with that? We're talking all about stagflation out there in the world, that you have rising costs of goods, but that wages are not keeping up with it. What happens if the inflation really gets out of control, right? What happens if the cost of raw materials and the cost of production gets super high? Then you see demand destruction happen, right? Consumers are only willing to pay so much for particular products that they want. Once it reaches a certain price, they say, hey, I'm not going to buy it anymore. I can live without having a gourmet bedazzled waffle maker. Well, if demand goes down and sales go down, then a company has to find a way to cut costs. And if they can't cut costs due to this, where do they cut it? They cut it over there on employees, right? Labor. So I don't know. I mean, that's a big, economic model that you have in there, and what are the implications of something like this occurring, especially if this keeps going. If this holds, it tells me, there's no way inflation can't happen. Inflation has to happen unless there becomes a point at which demand destruction happens entirely to where people just won't buy anything. This tells me inflation has to come down the pike because this cost has to get worked in. We're talking in just a matter of 3.5 months, the cost of oil is up 78%. Oil is used, not just in shipping, but also in manufacturing. It's the propellant used to create all these things, to run your chainsaws, to run your woodworking machines, to run your silicone presses, whatever it is. And then not to mention putting things on boats and planes and trucks and cars, and commuting costs are going up. So this is a unique situation happening in here. And, the big question is, can you anticipate more inflation coming from it? I think the only thing that is a little nerve-wracking about it would be if it can actually sustain itself, right? And, we've seen it before where it can get up just like that, go at that velocity right in there, and then turn around on itself very quickly. And so the point I'm getting at is that, when we had our big run up that happened, in late 2020, early 2021, the run up occurred on the anticipation of inflation. And the thing that I'm starting to question right now is, are we starting to see that narrative again? You have to say to yourself, what would make people run and FOMO and buy back into crypto and buy back into things with the inflation narrative, right? You're seeing it. So, it's all happening so fast, right? So it's hard, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I have all the answers to what's going to happen in regards to oil and how geopolitical events can occur exactly at resistance levels that were set 8 years ago. And, if this is a short-term breakout in oil or if it's going to maintain itself. But I say to myself, if oil maintained itself up here, there's no question that everything is going to get more expensive to do, whether just to make products or to go traveling or to even ship products and move products around the country. It just costs more, and that's got to be worked into prices. And if people are anticipating more inflation, well, we saw what happened back in 2020, 2021 during the anticipation of inflation phase. So I'm intrigued by it. I don't have all the answers to it on what it all means and why it's happening so quickly. But, logic, that's where my brain goes when I start thinking about that. And, as Bitcoin's over here trying to work into a retrace, right? What have we seen at the top of every Bitcoin bull run? It's been an alt season, right? It's happened in every top of every Bitcoin bull run. And in the 2018 bull run, it was into Bitcoin's retracement that we saw the altcoin market really go ham. And while is a narrative starting to build out there for something like that to happen, and I would think it brings back that whole inflation narrative all over again. So it's quite interesting. Either way, we'll keep an eye on it. We'll see how things develop, and we'll see if oil is going to keep going up higher. If it goes up much higher than where it's at right now, I could see sheer panic of inflation coming. I mean, if you had $130 per barrel, yeah. Once I'm done with this, I'm definitely going to go fill up my vehicle and fill up my gas canisters. Either way, looking back at Bitcoin, looks like we're starting to get a move down. We've been talking about this. I'm all in favor for somewhat of a deviation from this fractal. I was talking about yesterday that, is the altcoin market, what we saw in 2018 was into the retracement. The altcoin market was taking off, and we haven't seen that happening yet over here in the altcoin market. And is the altcoin market telling us a story about Bitcoin that this fractal is not? And well, if you look at this move that has happened ever since I started recording, that looks like a small deviation. So we'll see if this thing continues to play out or if this is somewhat just of a trick at this point. Maybe, long squeezing or something first. But I'm all in support for somewhat of a deviation to happen in here to buy that altcoin market a little bit more time. But otherwise, those are my thoughts right now. Seeing what's happening with oil, it's pretty crazy. And it definitely does lay down the foundation of a narrative of inflation anticipation, which is what we had in 2020 that led to our big run. So I'll keep an eye on this today. We'll see if we get our first deviation here and if Bitcoin has bought the altcoin market a little bit more time. But all right, guys, that's going to be it for this one. Happy Thursday. I hope that you're having a good week so far. I appreciate you so much for watching my channel. If you're looking for something to do, of course, you can check out my website over here, bcbacker.com. This is a course that I put together where I deep dive into the previous Bitcoin bull runs, the previous altcoin market cycles, tying them all together to show how the cryptocurrency market has worked in the past. I talk about my personal exit plans in here, and I teach you how to set up your own charts and your own indicators within TradingView and CoinTrader Pro. I also had the most recent market update in there on February 28th, so just 3 days ago. And you can check out all of this educational content over here on bcbacker.com. You can follow me over here on Twitter at bcbacker. And I want to thank you so much for watching my channel. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.